Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Marielle Schuberth, 3-time experienced gestational surrogate and intake manager for Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor, where our aim is a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey for all. Today, I'm excited to have first-time surrogate Brittany with us, and Brittany recently delivered her first Surro baby. So welcome, Brittany. Why don't we start? How postpartum are you?
I am almost 9 weeks postpartum now. So tomorrow, I'm officially 9 weeks postpartum. So I'm really excited about being on with you, and thanks for having me.
Of course. So why don't we just start and you tell us a little bit about you and your family and kind of what made you want to be a surrogate in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't even know how old I am anymore. I'm 32, and my husband and I have been together for coming up on 16 years,
Wow.
and married for 13. So we are actually high school sweethearts.
I love that.
And we have 3 kiddos of our own. We have a almost 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3.5-year-old. So always busy, always kind of go. Outside of being a mom and a wife, I am also a doula and a LPN. LPN, LVN, just kind of depends on where you are in the country, what it's called.
Yep.
And my husband is prior military, so for the most part, I've been a stay-at-home mom since we had our oldest. So it's been kind of a crazy journey, just in the world in general. But being a mom has kind of always been. It's always been my dream to be a mom. Before we had kids, and we actually had trouble getting pregnant with our first. So he is what I like to call, he's our Clomid baby. So I never had to do any IVF or anything with him, but it took us a good 5 years.
Wow.
From the time we started trying to the time we actually had him was 5 years.
Wow.
And in that 5 years, I got immersed into the infertility community and learning more about like how different things work and why, and how some people just can't even get pregnant. And so that's when I first actually was like introduced to surrogacy, like in real time. Obviously you see it on TV, you see it like in shows and things like that.
Yep. Which is so wild to me how often you actually do see it nowadays, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so but I had that firsthand experience of like meeting people who had to go through IVF, meeting people who IVF didn't work for them. And so they were researching adoption, surrogacy, and things like that. So like seeing that side of things firsthand and not quite being a part of it, but also being a part of it, is kind of what drew me into surrogacy in the first place. So before we had our first, I always told myself and my husband that once we were done having kids of our own, I wanted to help the infertility community and in some way that I could.
Yep.
And so we went on to have our second, no problems. We had our third, no problems. No need for any medication or anything for them. And then we had our third, and she was about 6 months old. And I'm like, we are done. I don't want any more kids of my own. This is it. I've hit my threshold. And I told my husband, I want to look into surrogacy. I want to become a surrogate. And he was a little bit, I don't even know the word to use, but he was like almost thrown off, even though I had talked about it previously. So it was kind of, he's like, oh, okay. And then, I spent another year doing research and everything, before we officially decided to really dive in and for me to become a surrogate. So it was kind of a long process, but I am very type A. And so I want to learn everything and anything about whatever I'm going to do before I fully jump into something.
Yep.
So that's why I took the full almost year doing all that research and figuring out which way I wanted to go.
Yeah. And I think that's a great thing to bring up, because do your research. It is a lot. There's a lot to process when it comes to surrogacy. Even if you do go through an agency or you're independent, there's so much that you need to know about the process. And that's what we love about this podcast, is really shining light on how big of a process it is, because in movies and everything, like you were talking about, it just kind of is this happy, easy thing. And I'm just going to go, and like Phoebe on Friends, she just went in one day and got pregnant. Like, they didn't show the like contracts and the months of medication and it's a whole process. So I think it's great that you really took the time to process all of that. So how did you get your husband to kind of come around, or was it just through the research once he saw kind of what everything really was? What do you think?
It was a lot. I think it was just a little bit of everything. My husband is very on board with just about everything that I want to do. I mean, crazy me, I started my own business when I was 3 months postpartum. So like he knows my brain.
Yeah.
And so I think it was just a matter of talking to him about it, telling him like that I was serious. This is not something that I'm just like on a whim I want to do. No, I'm doing my research. And so like we talked about it at one point, and then a little while later we talked about it more. And then I just kind of kept going, and he never objected. And then he finally was fully on board.
I love that. So, just blind faith in his wife. And hey, it seems like that you have a good sense of things. And so I think that's awesome. So tell us about your surrogacy experience and like the relationship you had with your intended parents during your pregnancy, and kind of any updates on how that is kind of unfolding now that you're postpartum and have completed the mission, so to speak, of Mission Baby.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of backstory. We were on a semi-independent journey. So we had a coordination company help us with everything. And we actually matched through the coordination company, which was really great. And the way we matched was a little serendipitous. Their profile wasn't even officially live, and I somehow got a hold of it. And then I contacted the company, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that wasn't supposed to go live." And so it's just kind of a great situation.
Oh, it was. They were just meant for you, I guess.
Yes, and that's what we said through our whole journey was, it was just it was meant to be. And so that was great. And we had quite a long journey to baby, because obviously everything takes time. Actually, our legal was fairly quick. We only went back and forth like twice. It was done in 2 weeks.
Wow, that is impressive.
Yeah, it was really fast, I think. And then we finished legal, and literally the same day that we had got legal clearance, we scheduled our first transfer.
Great.
And so we got clearance at the end of January, and our first transfer was the middle of March. And so it was really quick. I mean, we matched in August, and we had our first transfer in March. Oh. And so that part was really fast. The part that was not very fast was our first transfer was actually a chemical pregnancy, or what they thought was a chemical pregnancy, which then turned into a pregnancy of unknown origin, which is basically an ectopic pregnancy, but they couldn't classify it as an ectopic pregnancy because they didn't know officially if it was ectopic. Because nothing ever developed in my uterus, nothing ever developed elsewhere that we could see. So they label it as like a pregnancy of unknown origin. And so with that means I got pregnant, my numbers went up a little bit, then they went down at my third beta. And then they're like, okay, we'll stop all medication, and we'll just track your numbers till it goes down to 0.
Yep.
Well, I went in a week after I stopped medication. My numbers weren't going down, they went back up.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so we're like, okay, well, let's wait, see what happens. They went up again 2 days later. They're like, okay, we got to actually take some time and do something.
Yeah.
So I did 1 methotrexate injection, basically stops the growth of all new cells. So I did that, and then waited a week, did another HCG, and my numbers still had not gone down. They went back up again.
Oh my gosh. And still nothing visible on the ultrasound?
So still nothing visible on the ultrasound.
Wow.
And so we had to do a second methotrexate injection. And then after that second one, my numbers finally started decreasing. But then it took 6 full weeks after that for my numbers to hit 0. So 6 full weeks after the second methotrexate injection, my numbers were finally 0. And then I had to get a full cycle in before we could schedule the next transfer. And in between, like, my numbers hitting 0 and before we could do the next transfer, I had to do a second hysterosonogram, which is the saline sonogram. So I had to do another one in there because with everything, they wanted to make sure there wasn't any retained tissue. They wanted to make sure that there was no polyps or anything in my uterus. Which everything looked great, which I was very, very thankful for. But then we didn't get to do our second transfer until August. And this is all 2024, fairly recently. So we did our second transfer at the end of August 2024. And that is the transfer that led to the pregnancy. And so our pregnancy and our relationship with the intended parents, I actually have still a great relationship with the intended parents. Throughout the pregnancy, we were talking 2-3 times a week, mostly text message. And they came here. I'm in Minnesota. So they came out to Minnesota, middle of winter, just before Christmas for a 20-week ultrasound. And they are not from the Midwest. So
were they domestic intended parents?
Yes, they were domestic, but they are not from the Midwest at all. So they were not used to the cold and the snow here in Minnesota, and they were here a week before Christmas.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so, so it was very cold, very snowy, but they were here for a long weekend, which was really nice. They were like, we had such a great relationship. Like, they came to my son's hockey practice. And met my family, met a couple of my husband's relatives, and not my whole family, just a few people from my family. But like, my sister even met them, and she's like, that was so cool that I got to meet them, and like, all that kind of stuff. And then throughout the pregnancy, we kept in contact and we talked about everything. Every time we had a OB appointment, they were on video call. Like, I didn't, and I am one of those people. I know some clinics and ultrasounds that they're like, no recording. You can't have your phone. I'm like, no, like, there's no. I walked in and I'm like, just so you know, I'm calling the parents. That way they didn't have a chance. Like, I didn't ask. I just told them the way it was going to be.
And technically you're not recording if you're calling, right?
Exactly. But it's weird. We had a follow-up anatomy scan at 24 weeks. I don't remember what we were checking, but we had a follow-up one. And like, those anatomy scans, like, generally they say you can't, like, some places say you can't even call, like, video call for some weird reason. But I don't go into places and say, hey, are you okay with this? Especially like in the medical community, I know from my experience as a nurse and my experience as a doula, a lot of what they say is policy. And so I'd rather not ask and ask for permission or ask for forgiveness later. Because in my mind, and I feel like this is the way that it should be everywhere, but especially for me, I'm like, I'm a patient and baby's a patient, and baby needs their advocate as well. And so that's the way I went into it. And that's the way I kind of talked to everyone throughout the journey. Like, my doctor was super, super, super good about the surrogacy and super into like knowing about everything and talking to my intended parents. Like, when we went in for our first appointment, she asked them what questions they had. Like, directly, like, looked at them and is like, what can I answer for you guys?
Yeah. Wow, that's great, because a lot of OBs don't really know what to do with that, because some of them treat it like an adoption or something like that, and that's not really it, and so they just don't know how. So that's great that they were able to involve them in the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very thankful for my OB, and everything went really well through the whole pregnancy. And I had a very easy, flawless surrogacy pregnancy. My glucose test was great. My blood pressure was really good. That kind of leads to like the end of the pregnancy and like her birth. So like we did weekly BPPs and weekly appointments starting. The BPPs were starting at 32 weeks. And then our weekly appointments with my OB started at 34, just because of the way like timing worked out.
Okay.
And at my 37-week appointment, I had a little bit of a higher blood pressure.
Okay.
And like, it was just a one-time like fluke of a blood pressure. But with the BPPs and the weekly appointments with my OB, we were able to see her position continuously. So starting at 32 weeks, we were doing ultrasound. And from 32 weeks on, she was very flip-floppy. Like sometimes she would be breech, sometimes she would be head down, sometimes she would be transverse. And so, and I'm talking, this would happen like every single week.
That's
she was
wild.
in a
But
different
she
position.
just
It was
was
kind of crazy.
enjoying her space in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I started at 34 weeks. I started going to the chiropractor because I'm like, I got to do something to make sure she's head down because my babies were all born vaginally. I'm like, this is my hope, you know,
Yep.
and no one really hopes for a C-section unless it's like a repeat C-section, things like that.
Yep.
But as a doula, I had all the resources on my hands.
Yep. We're going to try all the things.
Yeah. Inversions, the chiropractor, massages, all of it. So at our 37 or 38 week appointment, it was our 38 week appointment, is when my blood pressure was just like barely elevated. I'm talking like 137 over like 91. So like it was barely elevated. And then I came home. We were on the phone with the intended parents actually during the appointment. And my doctor's like, we'll come back tomorrow because it was a Thursday. She didn't want me to wait all weekend in case it was high blood pressure or any kind of preeclamptic stuff. She's like, come back tomorrow and we'll redo your blood pressure and see where we go. Well, baby was actually head down that day, that Thursday. So we're like, yes, let's hope she stays that way. And the parents are like, well, we're going to come today. They were supposed to come 2 days later. They actually just came a day or 2 days early. And they're like, we're getting on a plane in like 2 hours. We're coming now just in case tomorrow you have high blood pressure and we have to go straight into an induction. And we went back that next day, that Friday, and my blood pressure was normal. It had been normal all day.
Good.
Overnight, all of it, because I was taking my blood pressure at home. So I wasn't concerned about going in and having a high blood pressure, other than like that stress factor of high blood pressure. But I went in and my blood pressure was totally normal. But we talked in depth with my OB about, well, do we wait a week until your scheduled C-section and then hope she's head down at that appointment and then we can just induce instead? Or she was still head down that next day. And we're like, yes. Do we just induce and not risk waiting an extra week for her to flip again?
Yep.
And so we actually all talked about it, and I was very comfortable. I was induced with all three of my babies, so I was very comfortable inducing. I didn't love that it was early, but with everything else, I would have rather gone into the induction rather than going in and knowing I have to go in for a C-section because of her positioning. So we actually went in. She was still head down at the hospital when we got in that night. Super thankful. But this girl, by the next day when they checked me after doing cervical prep, she was no longer head down.
No.
Yeah. So they checked me at like noon. And we spent the next 6 hours trying to flip her on our own and doing things like that. Because with the intended parents history and things like that, they didn't want to do an ECV. And I had an ECV with my youngest. So like I knew the process and things like that. And I was comfortable with it. So there was kind of I wouldn't even say a tension, just they did not want it. And I was very okay with it. And I really wanted to try it.
Yeah.
But so we spent 6 hours trying to flip her on our own, and we checked her, and she was in 3 different positions each time we checked her. So she was all over the place.
That is wild.
Yeah. So it ended up being, we didn't do an ECV. She ended up not flipping. And I just was like, okay, she's not flipping on her own. There's got to be a reason for it. And, after lots of tears and crying and me talking to the doctor myself, we ended up going into a C-section. And thankfully it was non-emergent. I wasn't having contractions, nothing like that.
Yeah.
So it was just a we had already started the induction, so they didn't want to send me home.
Yeah.
Thankfully they hadn't broke my water or anything, but it was still, once they start medications for an induction there, they don't want to send you home because the risk of you just anything happening and it being in your system, they want to make sure you're monitored. So, knowing we were going to go into the C-section, at our hospital system, generally it's one support person in the room with you. And I know it's that way a lot of places. But as a doula, I also know the policies. They usually let one support person plus a doula in the OR at our hospitals.
Okay.
Which is great, especially if it's a non-emergent C-section. So I told the doctor, I said, if we're doing a C-section, I want to talk to the anesthesiologist. Because if you don't know, the anesthesiologist is the one who makes the call. Because that's their space, not the doctor's space. So it's kind of crazy. I made them bring the anesthesiologist in so I could talk to the anesthesiologist and say, this is my support person. And this is baby's support person. They both need to be there. Because I had written into my contract, and I was totally okay with it if it came down to it, that the mom would be in the OR with us if we ended up having to have a C-section. So it would have been me and mom had I not talked to the anesthesiologist and said, I need my support person too. And he was totally okay with it, which was awesome. So in the OR, obviously it was me, it was my husband, and then intended mom. And our hospital has 2 ORs that are very specific for OB. And in between them, there's a room called the recess room. It's a resuscitation room. And that's actually where baby's dad got to stand.
Oh,
and there's a door with a window. Yeah. And so he was able to watch too, just not be in the room, which was really nice. So we were all very involved in the OR, and even the doctor who delivered baby was absolutely amazing. Once baby was born, they let the pediatric doctor handle the baby and the nurses, and she was all about me, talking to me about my family, talking to me about because my nurse brain, she's like, I bet you are just wondering everything. I'm like, absolutely. I ended up getting internal staples, which dissolve on their own. It was I had never heard of them before. I was super interested. So she kept a few for me and showed them to me while I'm still laying on the table and everything. So it was such an amazing experience too. My husband took pictures of mom seeing baby for the first time. Obviously when you're in the OR, you can't fully see their face because of masks and everything. But my husband got a few pictures of her peeking over and seeing her, and you can see the amazement in her eyes and things like that. So it was absolutely amazing. Not the way I envisioned it originally, but it was definitely the way it was supposed to be, because her baby's umbilical cord was actually wrapped around her ankle. So she wouldn't have been able to fully descend into my pelvis and be born vaginally. So it actually was exactly the way that it was supposed to be. And looking in hindsight, I am very glad we didn't do the ECV, because had we done the ECV, broke my water, everything that kind of leads after that, we probably would have ended in an emergency C-section anyways, because she wasn't descending. So looking back on it, I'm just very thankful that we made the decisions that we did. And, I prayed on it while we were in the hospital, and just kind of let it be to God. And it was very, very much that's the way that it ended up being. And it was absolutely amazing.
Well, and I think the way that you're describing that is a very real part of the surrogacy journey, of it being your body and somebody else's baby, and trying to find that line of doing what you need to do while also respecting their part of that. They wanted not to do it, you wanted to do it, so how you kind of fall in that. And those kind of decisions can be hard because they can't force you to do or not do something, but you kind of have that weight. I know with my second delivery, we had a similar thing. I was really hoping to try for a VBAC. But there were very specific parameters to be able to try a VBAC. And my Surro baby was huge, and he was measuring big. And they're like, if he doesn't come on his own by this date, like we need to schedule the C-section, because they couldn't do an induction for a VBAC, was what they told me. So I tried all the things, ate all the spicy things, like galloping, and nothing worked. And I was upset, obviously, because I wanted that moment too, of the aha moment, right? Of like handing the baby and the pictures and all the things. And that's what I was the most upset about. I'm like, I don't even care about the C-section. It's like that moment that you want to do. But pictures and video are great. And in the end, even if it's not exactly how you envisioned it ending, those parents are still parents because of an amazing thing that you did. And you will remember that. But it's so awesome that your husband was able to get some of those photos as well, because you can still see it. It may not be as Instagram worthy as some of these other ones, but you can still see it, and it's just as worthy, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did your intended parents kind of handle knowing that you both didn't kind of agree on a certain part of the birth process?
They were really good with it, like overall. And they explained, and I knew their history and everything like that. And so they just kind of always brought it back to what their history was.
Yeah.
And so like, and then I'm very laid back most of the time. That was one thing that I was pushing for, and they were pushing for, like both sides of it, right up until the end. And it kind of came down to, the hospital was like, well, we don't, like, your contract is not super here if this situation happens. So they told us that if we couldn't agree together, they would have to bring the hospital lawyers in, and figure it out that way. And I was like, it's not worth it to drag this out and everything, to like fight for my side, to just try and get, just because that's what I wanted. The goal was a healthy baby. And so like, we got to that point where I'm just like, I get it. Because an ECV has risks of like a placental abruption. And so with their history and things like that, that was it's a very, very small risk. And like, even 2 or 3 doctors had mentioned that it has never happened in their career. Like a placental abruption and things like that. But it was there, and that is a big part of what weighed heavy on their minds. And I totally understand it. And between, I didn't want to bring lawyers in, and I also knew that if I pushed hard enough, it would eventually strain the relationship. And we had such a great relationship throughout the pregnancy and everything. And I love them to death, and I understand their side. And the way I birthed wasn't worth changing that relationship. And so like, they handled it really well. They were very respectful and all of that kind of stuff. It came down to, do I want to fight and lose this relationship? Or do I want to say a healthy baby is the most important thing here? And like I said, I was in the hospital bed just crying, because
I'm sure that's already a very emotional thing. You've been in labor forever. Like, they've been messing with you, and now you're in this position, having this kind of, not altercation, but back and forth with them. I'm sure that did not sit as well as maybe in a more stable environment it would have. I can only imagine adding that to everything else going on.
Yeah, definitely. And so, we sat there in that 6 hours of trying to get her to flip and everything. I spent a lot of that time meditating on it and praying about it and everything like that. I just finally got to the point where I'm like, I'm exhausted emotionally. I'm exhausted just mentally. I just want to have this baby for them and make sure that she is okay. And so, and I don't like the word conceited, but that's like the only real word they can use for it. And so I just kind of conceded my side and said, I totally understand. This is your baby. Let's just get her out. And so, they were very respectful, and I saw them like the very next day after she was born. She was born at 8:30 at night, and I saw them by 8 o'clock the next morning.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was really great. And our rooms were right next to each other. And so we saw them the whole time we were in the hospital, on and off here and there. And it was a great experience there too. I mean, my mother-in-law brought my kids that next day. They got to meet baby twice. They got to see her in the hospital and hold her and
that's
everything.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it was absolutely amazing. And it's just, even now, I mean, I just got a text yesterday because she was 2 months old yesterday. And so I got a text saying, happy 2 months and blah, 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 with pictures and things like that. And so, yeah, we don't talk as much. Obviously, they have a newborn and they are in their newborn bubble and they're not asking questions about their baby daily or every couple of days. But we've still been in contact at least once a week, which has been absolutely amazing. Getting stuff from them and,
because that shift can be hard when you kind of are used to like having all of this communication and updates and this and that. It's not necessarily like you want them, but it's kind of hard to go from so much communication to nothing. It's just, and you have all of your postpartum hormones flying around, and it can be a hard natural stop. It makes sense why they're dealing with a newborn and all of the things, but it definitely can kind of come up to a harsh halt or decline when it goes from so much to nothing, and it can be tricky. So I'm glad that you guys found a system that works.
Yeah, it's definitely been a weird transition, and it's not been a hard, or it's just weird.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to put words to, but I think anybody who's gone through surrogacy can experience it, because it's like you're doing this huge thing and you've been preparing for it for years sometimes, and you finally do it, and then it's just like, oh, I kind of felt like that actually after the embryo transfer. It's like you do all this prep work and it's legal and it's this and that, and then you go in and like, I don't know what I was expecting. It wasn't like I wasn't expecting acrobats to come through, but it like just was kind of done, and then I was like, that's it. Like it seemed so anticlimactic. There are some of these weird halts where you're like, you expect. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was a lot less like involved, I guess, than I thought with all the preparing. But I digress. Any advice that you would give to women who are considering becoming a surrogate, or words of wisdom that you wish you had known or want to stress to somebody who's considering being a surrogate?
Yeah, definitely. I think my biggest thing is hold out for your perfect match. Don't settle. Just because the agency gives you someone and you're like, well, what if I don't get another match? Because I know some people can feel that way. Wait for that right match. Don't use that as your, I'm going to just choose these people because they said yes to me. Only pick a couple or a person that you want to go with because you truly feel like it's that perfect match and that it's 100% you want to continue with them. And kind of goes along with that. Don't be afraid to break a match. If there is any kind of red flags that come up or head-butting situations, because you can only break the match for so long. Once you're pregnant, you are in it for the long haul. And you don't want any of those red flags coming up throughout the pregnancy. I've seen so many other surrogates who are 15 weeks pregnant, and then all of a sudden, there were signs in the beginning when we were going through legal, and now they're trying to control what I'm eating or trying to do this or trying to do that. And now they can't change that. So that's kind of those things. Hold out for that match and don't be afraid to break a match if you thought it was the right one and then realize a few weeks later that it's just not. It's not worth the pain and suffering for you mentally to go through a match that is not right for you.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with all of that. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I want to thank our very special guest, Brittany, for joining us for our chat today. Be sure to check us out online at surrogacymentor.com and modernparentmentor.com if you're interested in knowing whether surrogacy is right for you, and take our 2-minute easy quiz on our website if you're interested in becoming a surrogate. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to learn more about gestational surrogacy and how to have a safe, ethical surrogacy journey. Talk to you next time.